Today, we're going to get into a really fascinating legal case out of India. It's about a marriage that lasted, get this, only 3 days. It's a story that actually forced the courts to look past just the physical facts and dive deep into the human mind, and it ended up changing the law forever. So let's unpack how it all went down.
I mean, really think about that question. Can a marriage be over before it ever really gets started? It sounds kind of impossible, right? But believe me, the story of this couple challenges everything we think we know about what makes a marriage, a marriage in the first place.
All right, so let's set the scene. The story starts back in March of 1996. We've got our couple, Maganti Kanakadurga and Maganti Venkateswarlu. And at first, it seems pretty standard, a traditional wedding, the promise of a whole new life together, all the usual stuff.
But yeah, this was definitely not your ordinary marriage. Just look at this timeline. The wedding happens on March 6th. The couple is supposed to start their new life together on the 8th, and by that exact same night, it's all over. It completely collapses. 3 days. That's it. That's all it took for this whole thing to just implode.
So, as you can probably guess, what on earth happened in those 3 days became this huge point of contention. And the entire legal battle really hinged on two completely different, totally conflicting stories. It was a classic he said, she said situation.
And here is where it gets really dramatic. On one side, you have the husband's story. He claims his wife flat out refused to consummate the marriage. He says she confessed she was impotent because she hadn't reached puberty yet, using a local term, masikama, and then ran out of the room crying. But her story? It's a 180-degree turn. She says no, consummation absolutely did happen. She claims this whole thing is a lie, a scheme her husband cooked up to get out of the marriage so he can marry someone else for a bigger dowry. I mean, you couldn't write two more different versions of events.
The fallout was, instant. The husband goes and tells his parents right away. The wife gets taken for a medical exam to check things out. And then, according to the husband, things get even crazier. The wife's parents supposedly offered their younger daughter to him as a replacement. He says no to that and files for an annulment, and just like that, the legal battle was on.
Now here's an interesting twist. A lower court actually agreed with the husband and granted the annulment. But the wife wasn't having it. She appealed, and the case went all the way up to the High Court. And this is where things get really deep, because now the judges had to wrestle with a massive legal question that had no simple answer. And it's super important we understand what an annulment actually is. It's not like a divorce, which ends a marriage that was real and legal. Nope. An annulment is like hitting the undo button. It says the marriage was never legally valid to begin with. So the husband wasn't just saying, I want out. He was saying this was never a real marriage from day one.
Okay, so the High Court, being brilliant legal minds, took this messy, complicated case and boiled it down to 3 crystal clear questions. First, does not attaining puberty automatically make a woman impotent? Straightforward enough. Second, was she physically able to consummate the marriage, and did it happen? And third, and this is the one that changes everything, even if puberty isn't the issue, could she be considered impotent for some other reason? Now, to answer these questions, the court couldn't just look at this one couple's story. They had to go on a deep dive into legal history. They had to figure out what one of the most sensitive words in family law, impotency, actually means. You see, for the longest time, the law saw this in a really simple, almost mechanical way. Impotency meant you were physically, structurally unable to perform sexual intercourse. That's it. It was all about biology, not what was going on in your head.
But then you had these earlier cases that started to poke holes in that old idea. For instance, a court had already ruled that a woman who couldn't have children because she'd had her uterus removed was not legally impotent. And the logic there is powerful, right? If the inability to have kids doesn't count, then how could a temporary physical state, like not having reached puberty, possibly count either?
But this quote, this is the one that really blew the doors wide open. In another landmark case, the court said, hold on, impotence can be physical or it can be psychological. It can be caused by what they called an invincible repugnance, basically a deep-seated mental aversion or hatred for the act itself. All of a sudden, a person's state of mind was just as legally important as their physical body.
And this led to this really fascinating legal concept called relative impotency. It means that a person might be perfectly capable of having sex with anyone else on the planet, but for some psychological reason, they are completely incapable with their specific spouse. The law was no longer just asking, are you capable? It started asking, are you capable with this person? A huge shift.
So, armed with this new, much more nuanced understanding of impotency, one that now included psychology, the High Court was finally ready to make its decision in the case of the 3-day marriage. So, the big question is, with this whole new psychological lens to look through, how was the court going to answer its own 3 questions?
And here come the answers, and there is a major twist. Question 1. Is not attaining puberty a form of impotency? The court said an emphatic no. Question 2. Did consummation happen? Based on the evidence, especially the husband's immediate actions, the court believed him and said no. But then we get to question 3, the game changer. Was she impotent for another reason? The court's answer was a shocking yes.
And this single sentence right here is the heart of the entire decision. Let's break it down. The court said that even though she was physically able to go through with it, her own belief that she was unfit because she hadn't reached puberty created a powerful psychological barrier, a repugnance, and that mental block, in the eyes of the law, was its own form of impotence.
The court used this incredible phrase. They said she was mentally paralyzed. It wasn't about her body anymore, it was about her mind. Her own deep-seated conviction that she wasn't ready created that invincible repugnance we talked about, making consummation basically impossible for her. Her own psychology created a very real, very legal barrier. So in the end, the High Court upheld the annulment, but for completely different, much more complex reasons than the first court. And by doing that, this one little case about a 3-day marriage ended up leaving a massive, lasting legacy on Indian family law.
Let's break down that legacy into 4 key takeaways. First, and most importantly, it established that psychology matters just as much as physical ability. Second, it made it crystal clear that puberty is not some kind of legal test for being ready for marriage. Third, it showed that a person's actions, like immediately running to tell their parents, can be treated as powerful evidence. And fourth, it really solidified a modern legal idea. The question isn't whether a condition is permanent, but whether the marriage wasn't consummated because of that condition.
At the end of the day, this case is such a great reminder that the law isn't just a dusty old book of rules. It's a living, breathing thing that has to evolve to understand the messy, complicated reality of being human. It has to look beyond the physical and into the mind.
And that leaves us with one final, really tough question to think about. This case opened the door to the idea of psychological impotency, but it also raised a thorny issue. In the eyes of the law, where do you draw the line between a genuine, invincible psychological condition and just a personal choice or refusal? And that, well, that's a question the courts are still wrestling with to this day.